All right, guys, this is biology lesson 1.06 on adapting and evolving. So we're continuing with our characteristics of life. We have characteristic number 7 here. And we have two terms. We have adapt, A-D-A-P-T, not adopt, adapt, and evolve. And they don't mean the same thing. When something adapts, you adapt all the time. So I'm recording these videos in the time of COVID. And a few years ago, when we had the lockdown, you went from having class with your classmates, sitting where you want in the middle of a classroom, to being online. And then the next year, you started out with a regular school year, and then you had to adapt to a hybrid schedule. So you had to change. But it's change that's in the short term. So it's a change that happens relatively quickly. So we're going to define this as short-term change. So hopefully by the time you are watching this video, life has gotten back to normal and those adaptations really aren't necessary anymore. How does an organism adapt? Well, in times of lack of food or water, sometimes you'll hear about deer, not so much now because they eat the grain that's left over in the fields, but back in times where there weren't farmers, in winters when there weren't a lot of food, deer would strip the bark off of trees and eat it. They don't usually eat that food. That's not their preferred food, but they adapted. Or if we're in a drought and there's a lack of water, animals will go drink from places they usually wouldn't drink. Those are all adaptations. When we think of evolution and we think of evolving, evolving is many small changes over very long periods of time. Very long periods of time. And these small changes accrue and they add up and they add up and they add up until over time we end up with an organism that looks very different than what we started with. So an example of that down here is, this is what is called a cladogram. And we're going to practice with these a lot through the course of the year. We're going to see these a lot. Down here at one end of the cladogram, and I don't know if you can read this, this says bacteria. And this says prokaryotic cell. And we have, we go along and we have a split, and we're going to kind of ignore this split for now, but here we have a big split, and you'll see it says membrane-bound nucleus. So what that means is here we have eukaryotes. So over time, these bacteria would change a little, change a little, change a little, and eventually it got to the point where down here we have, it's called a Formicata. These are single-celled organisms. Scientists don't think that one day a bacteria woke up with a nucleus. They think that nucleus probably had a precursor or like a protonucleus, and then it had maybe an area that didn't have a membrane, and then it formed a membrane. But at some point we got all these small changes. We ended up with these single-celled organisms that had a nucleus, and so they'd be characterized as eukaryotes. And if we look over time, these eukaryotes became more complex until they got to the point where they had some organelles. And then after time, we ended up with things that could do photosynthesis. So here you have a very simple photosynthetic, and we end up with a tree. So we're getting more complex as we go. And what we're seeing is all of these small changes over we're talking millions and millions of years, accumulating and ending up with an organism. So down here, my bacteria are really small. Over here, this guy looks a lot more complex, right? Well, if you carry those changes out and you keep going, you see here so we have time is flowing this way. We end up with something that's a lot more complex, like a frog. And we're going to talk in some detail about the process that drives evolution. Again, this is in the time of COVID, and we're seeing this with the coronavirus. It started out as one type of virus, and we keep having these variants. So we start off with the alpha variant and then the beta. We're up to delta. And as we go back to school this year, there's a big debate on whether or not we need to wear masks because the virus has evolved and we're up to the delta variant. And coming down the road, they're in the headlines this morning. I read about the lambda variant. So it's continuing to evolve. So evolution is real. It happens. Adaptation happens every day with every organism. That's your short-term change, let's say, to your environment. And evolution is the accumulation, and let's put that accumulation of many small changes. And this gives rise to new species. But that is characteristic number 7, adapting and evolving.